And joining us now, Margaret Wente, columnist at the Globe and Mail. And Peggy, it's always good to have you in that chair. How are you?
I'm fabulous, thank you.
Okay, you just saw the Steven Pinker interview. And before we kind of get specific here, I thought I'd just let you take a shot at him whichever way you want to go. What'd you think?
Well, you know, I'm a huge Steven Pinker fan. What can I say? I mean, first of all, he looks cute. But I love his message, and I love this message because it is an antidote. It's a refreshing antidote. It's one that we really need, especially for everybody who tells us that we live in a racist, homophobic, sexist society that is full of violence and oppression and bad things.
Well, you love being contrarian anyway.
Well, I would just say, you know, listen to Steven Pinker and get a grip.
Has this ever occurred to you as well, that the times in which we are living are actually the most peaceful ever? I mean, had that occurred to you before knowing about the book?
Yes, it occurs to me every day when I'm thinking straight. But the book, it just sets it out in such a graphic way that you cannot deny it. You know, we are the luckiest people ever born in the history of civilization.
When you say we, who do you mean?
I mean anybody who lives today in North America, in the developed world.
Anybody?
Just about anybody. Just about anybody.
Just about
maybe
anybody.
90% of us. Not everybody, obviously, but...
I want to bring, here's a quote from his book that I think is going to make you scream, which is why I'm putting it to you. So here we go. When the producers of Sesame Street issued a set of DVDs containing classic programs from the first years of the series, 1969 to 74, they included a warning on the box that the shows were not suitable for children. The programs showed kids engaging in dangerous activities like climbing on monkey bars, riding tricycles without helmets, wriggling through pipes, and accepting milk and cookies from kindly strangers. Censored altogether was Monster Piece Theater because at the end of each episode, the ascotted, smoking-jacketed host, Alistair Cookie, played by the Cookie Monster, gobbled down his pipe, which glamorizes the use of tobacco products and depicts a choking hazard. Now, have we completely lost it?
Yeah, sometimes we have. I mean, you can find examples of this silliness every day. We just had Halloween. Today, nobody's supposed to wear, you're not supposed to dress their kids up in scary costumes because it might be bad for them. It might traumatize them, and it might, you know, it might demonize other people. So you're supposed to dress them up in safe, cuddly costumes that aren't going to offend anybody and aren't going to be scary. That's the kind of world that we live in. And we forget how quickly and how much mores have changed, especially around kids. And kids' safety, that's a huge one. And you know, the way I was brought up would be called child abuse today. Probably the way any 60-year-old was brought up would be called child abuse today. Mores have changed completely, again, also around the behavior of men and women, and men towards women, and men versus women. So we forget how our standards have changed, and sometimes we have defined behaviors that seemed completely normal only a generation ago and redefined them as deviant, scary, abusive, immoral, violent, and wrong.
Mind you, having said that, I do remember watching, I think it's Goldfinger, the James Bond movie, where at one point in the film, Sean Connery, then playing Bond, smacks Honor Blackman, who plays Pussy Galore, right across the face and sends her across the room.
Yeah.
And I remember just shuddering watching that scene.
Absolutely.
And that was considered, of course, I mean, nobody would have bat an eyelash back then at that kind of a scene, right? I mean, it's 50 years ago.
You know, a lot of this change is good. You know, it's a demonstration of everything that Stephen Harper has argued in his book.
Steven Pinker, not
Stephen
Harper. Where's your head, lady? But you know, because we become so much more sensitized to violence, not only has our behavior changed, but our attitudes have changed hugely as well, and mostly for the good. I want to know whether we know it, because one of the things Pinker talked about in the interview was the fact that rape statistics had declined 80% in the last 35 years. And do you think women know this?
Isn't that stunning? Nobody knows that. Nobody knows that, Steve. You know, rape statistics are not unlike any other category of major violent crime. And as we know, major crime has been in steep decline, and we've leveled a lot of criticism in this country at the Stephen Harper government. because they're, they're increasing punishment and building prisons at the same time that violent crime is at record lows. Well, the same thing is true of violent crime against women and sexual assault. And that, but yet when you say this, and it's true, rape has declined by 80% in 35 years. People don't believe it. One reason people don't believe it is that there's we've built up a kind of grievance industry in this country, and a bunch of people have a big stake in things not getting better. So they're not going to acknowledge that they have gotten better.
I hear you on that, but I wonder if I'm going to take a kindlier approach to this, which is to say, if these organizations felt that that kind of information got out there and became too widespread, people might start letting their guard down. And that would not be a good thing either. Is that a fair point?
Oh, gee, not at this point. I don't think so. Within my lifetime, here's how far attitudes have changed. They're not going to change back. Within my lifetime, you could run a humorous magazine ad showing a man spanking his wife, putting her over his knee and spanking her because she bought the wrong kind of coffee. Within my lifetime, abuse of women was a joke. Wife beating was a joke. It was a source of humor. Of course, rape wasn't taken seriously as a crime.
And thankfully, we are not there
anymore. And thankfully, we are not there. But, we could pause to celebrate a little bit, because this is an enormous change in human behavior. And by exaggerating the problem, we don't do anybody any favors. And by redefining less serious things as very serious things, by redefining, for example, things like, common statistic used today on campus is that 62% of women at universities will suffer from some kind of sexual harassment while at university, and that a quarter of women, more or less, will suffer some kind of rape or attempted rape. Why? Whose advantage is it to scare people with those scary numbers when they're simply not true?
What if they are true?
They're not true. They're exaggerated. They're cooked up. You can only get those numbers by taking, date behavior and redefining it as attempted rape.
Maybe this is a question of terminology. Today, sexual assault is such a catch-all that
it is. Anything qualifies.
Well, I don't know about anything, but a lot qualifies, right?
A lot qualifies. Groping qualifies.
Right.
But as Steve Paikin said in the interview, there is a difference between nasty texting and sawing somebody in half.
Yeah. We're coming up to the 30th anniversary of the repatriation of the Canadian Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and so I want to ask you your perspective on the rights revolution. How do you think it's going?
On the whole, pretty well. And the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is exactly in that pattern that we've seen. It was a major moment for Canada, something that Canadians profoundly identify with and are very proud of. But, there have been a few excesses along the way, and we've lost the path in some respects.
Exhibit number one, in your view?
Exhibit number one would be multiculturalism. And the celebration of Charter of Rights and Freedoms enshrined lots of things. Sexual equality, language rights, of course, and multiculturalism, a really, really big one. Important and positive in a lot of respects, because this was, these were messages about tolerance and acceptance and inclusivity, and diversity is not bad, it's good, difference is good, welcome strangers, all of these things are very positive messages. And, as a consequence, Canada, I think, is probably the most accepting and tolerant, I would argue, and inclusive country in the world today, although not everyone would agree with me on that. But on the downside, for a time, we enshrined multiculturalism and put it on a platform as a sort of good in itself, that diversity was good just because it was diverse for its own sake. And we kind of lost the track, because what we lost sight of was, maybe not all cultural values, in fact, are equally good. And so we have had to have this discussion. And it's been a little rough sometimes, and it's been kind of cantankerous sometimes. I think we've come out on the right side of it.
I talked to Pinker about potentially the next frontier in all of this, which is how we treat animals. And we have a little graphic here, forgive us, quoting out of the National Post here from last month. The Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario is to decide whether ethical veganism is a creed, as protected by anti-discrimination laws in the case of a Ryerson University master's student in social work who claims senior faculty, quote, sabotaged her career because of her moral equivalence of animals and humans. Sinem Katensi alleges a senior professor disagreed with her comparison of maltreated animals with marginalized people, said the connection was, quote, very inhuman and racist, and pressured Ms. Katensi's untenured supervisor into withdrawing his recommendation of her PhD candidacy at other schools, which she called an academic kiss of death. In an interview Monday, Ms. Katensi said the fallout has extended to her personal life, costing her friends among fellow students, and left her, quote, traumatized. Is ethical veganism the next battle for the rights revolution?
Well, I guess in her eyes it is. Yes. I think this is a wonderful example of rights run amok and claims on rights run amok.
This is a bridge too far, you think?
Exactly. No kidding. And in fact, the Human Rights Commissions, and they have to decide whether to hear this case, and if they're sensible, they won't. But the Human Rights Commissions, which were founded with very noble and good purposes, have in fact been, in many cases, reduced to hearing pretty marginal and frivolous claims. The BC Human Rights Commission, for example, recently heard a claim against a comedian, a stand-up comedian in a bar, who made offensive jokes directed at some of the customers. Now, you have to say, if this is what human rights violations have come to, then we should kiss the ground that we live in such a great place.
Because you'd argue that's his job. It's a comedian's job to be offensive to people.
That's right. That's what they do. Yeah.
Okay. Has the rights revolution gone too far?
Well, I think in some cases, yes, but we can correct. When I meet university students who are top students, who are getting their master's degrees or PhDs at some of our leading universities, and they've got scholarships and they have top marks, and they claim that they're marginalized, I have to say, give your head a shake. What are you learning? What are they teaching you? We are teaching some of the wrong. We have, unfortunately, sort of institutionalized the message on some of our campuses to a lot of our kids that they really are being oppressed and marginalized, even though they're the most privileged kids who've ever lived.
So pendulum's gone too far, and we got to kind of swing it
back. Yeah, I
think
let's drag it back here. Let's get a grip.
Do we, trying to understand what explains this, do you think there's an instinctive need in us to complain?
Well, first of all, we want to be progressive. We want to be on the side of progress, especially if you're young. You want to push rights. You want to search for injustices everywhere. And that's good. It's fair enough. It's part of being young. But, we need to, I think, keep a certain perspective on things. And I also think that you're right in the sense that if we're always scanning the horizon for problems and threats, and if there aren't real grievances out there, we will invent them.
And I guess in this day of the internet, anybody's got a grievance. It's there online somewhere, and off to the races you go.
It's wonderful. We can all complain.
Is that a wonderful thing?
It's great.
Yeah. I see the tongue very firmly implanted in your cheek as you say that. I mean, you've been around. Do you think Canadians are any more or less aggrieved than any other people?
I think we are normally aggrieved. I mean, it's part of the human condition to be aggrieved. It's part of our ancient tribalism. If I live in North Vancouver and you live in South Vancouver, we are going to have a rivalry. You see this in everybody's resentment of Toronto. The rest of the country hates Toronto. Why? Because they just do. We live here and they don't. It's part of, and we will unite to be aggrieved against the Americans. And so we'll always unite to be aggrieved against somebody or some group that's not us. It's just human nature.
I see you pulling your sleeves up there. I thought for a second you were getting ready to take a shot at me or something. No? That's just, you're just trying to get comfortable.
Words.
Okay.
Fighting words.
Well, I mean, I suppose it is one indication of how okay things are and how we are not living in medieval times, in that we can be concerned and offended about Alistair Cookie sticking his pipe in his mouth in a kid's video. I mean, that does indicate a level of sensitivity, doesn't it?
Our problems are good ones.
Our problems are good ones. That's a nice way to put it. Pinker seems to be quite bullish on modernity. He seems to think we now appreciate the gifts of the modern age. Do you agree?
He's bullish on modernity. I guess he's convinced me of that. He hasn't convinced me that we appreciate the gifts of the modern age. No. If you read the newspaper, I shouldn't say this, I work for the newspapers, but if you read the newspapers, if you read the news, you would think the world is the worst place than ever.
So the answer is stop reading newspapers.
Yeah, that's a very good antidote to thinking that the world is collapsing.
Peggy, you do want to have a job tomorrow, don't you?
Well, don't stop reading my column.
Don't stop reading your column, just the rest of the paper we can take a holiday on. Is that it?
But, you know, I mean, compared with the way our ancestors lived, you have to admit that it's a pretty good place, especially for women. Especially for women. Never better.
That's Margaret Wente. You can read her in the Globe and Mail, and we're thankful, as always, that you dropped by TVO tonight.